Welcome back to the Placeholder Podcast, everybody. I'm Caley Fretz. Great show for you, as always, today. Joining me, Dane Cash. Welcome back.
Hey, Caley. How are you?
I'm great. Kit Nicholson, how are you this fine Tuesday morning?
I'm okay, thank you. It's Tuesday afternoon for me, but yeah.
Only okay?
Well, actually, it's quite good. I mean, the weather's lovely. I can hear my puppy barking in the background, though, so I hope he's not too disruptive.
There's a train going by my house, so disruption all over the place. And Ronan Mc Laughlin, how are you, Ronan? Welcome back to the show.
I was feeling smug because I let's say I outsourced the first cut of the lawn for this year to a gardener who has kindly agreed in return for a handsome sum of money to cut my lawn. But the reason I was feeling smug about that was because, it's a heck of a job first time round in the year. And secondly, and now I'm less smug because he has just started with a lawnmower directly outside the window seconds after we hit record on the podcast here. So I've got a disruption on my end too.
The good news is that we have very fancy microphones, and I don't think the audience has any idea of any of these things are happening. Let's get into today's show. We got a whole bunch to talk about. We're going to talk a little bit about Liège and Pogačar and which races this spring we thought were monumental. I think that's a nice question. A little bit about Little 500, because Ronan and I were watching it over the weekend and very much enjoyed it. We actually have a story going up pretty soon on that fantastic little race. Ronan's got some news about a weird helmet strap, and we're going to play some Weekly Pain. This time with, how do I describe the audio that we've created?
Motivational.
Motivational audio?
Quickly.
Yeah, we have some motivational audio to go along with Weekly Pain.
Stressful.
Later in the show, but let's get right into it. Before we do, though, brief reminder that this podcast, all of the Escape Collective podcasts, are funded entirely, 100%, by our members. If you're not already a member, please do consider joining. Head over to escapecollective.com/join. Get all of our podcasts, including the members-only podcast, Performance Process, etc., plus full access to the website, no paywall. As we head into the Giro d'Italia and the Vuelta coming up this weekend, you're going to want full access to that website. And if you are not a member, you're going to get cut off after a couple stories. So make sure you head over to escapecollective.com/join. Sign up now. Support this podcast. We're your ear friends, and we just want to keep hanging out with you. But to do so, got to be a member. Thank you. All right, crew, let's just kick off with a question. I have a question for you all. How do you deal with Pogačar? Or I guess more broadly, how do you deal with the fact that we've had so many races this year and last year being won in this formerly very unusual way, this spectacular way where riders are going off the front with 40, 50, 60 kilometers to go, riding in solo, this thing that again was rare to the point of, like I remember Tom Boonen winning Roubaix. I think he attacked at 46K out. It was amazing. It was like something that we'd never seen before, and now it's like every single bike race. So how do you solve this problem? And of course, this is off the back of Liège over the weekend, which we'll talk about in brief. But let's start with the question.
I'll let Dane go first there, but I'll just add to what you said, Kelly, in that it's only a problem at the moment because there's no jeopardy. Pogačar attacks, and he is gone. And the race is over. If Pogačar attacked with 80k to go in Strada and 50k to go in Liège or whatever, and had 20 or 30 seconds the whole way and looked like he'd make a cut and struggle in the final climb, it would be very, very exciting. So yeah, I'll just qualify it with that, I think, first of all.
Instead, it wasn't. So how do we fix it? Dane?
That was a very reasonable thing for Ronan to say, and I just wanted to point out, before I give my answer, that you looked up a good sound accompaniment for Weekly Pain later.
Yeah.
We also should have found a way to incorporate the sound of music into the show, because all I can hear when you ask that question is, how do you solve a problem like Pogačar? Which actually, the cadence works perfectly with Maria. My answer is to bring back bigger teams, to go back to the one more rider that we had per team.
Bigger teams.
Yep. And
explain yourself.
Well, I think one of the problems here is that no one team in many of these races, whether it's Van der Poel or Pogačar, has had enough riders when those decisive moves have gone, where you get teammates working hard for each other. So there have been a couple of different races. I think Liège is one of them, where the big attack went, and like at Liège, for instance, Pogačar didn't have that much of a gap after La Redoute. It was like 10 seconds when he went over the top, something like that. If you actually had a concerted chase for like 30K, I mean, even Tadej Pogačar, as good as he is, I don't think he's staying clear of a concerted chase with a bunch of teams there I'm not saying that if you add an extra rider per team that they're all going to be good enough to be there when he goes, but I think it's a way more likely scenario. We got rid of the big teams because people were bored with team tactics, but I think it's gone too far in the other direction.
Not far enough.
Wow. Okay.
We'll get to Ronan's idea in a bit. Kate, what do you think?
Well, I mean, to build off what Dane was saying, I mean, on Sunday at Liège, he attacked 34 point something kilometers out near the bottom of La Redoute, so quite early, even if it was on the obvious climb. But within 5 kilometers, the rest of the race had sat up and looked at each other and gone, okay, so who's going to finish second? It's a symptom of Pogačar being too damn good for the whole season. And I would actually argue that at Strade Bianche, maybe it's because the race is quite handsome as well, in contrast to the Ardennes Classics, where these last 35k, they're just riding through forests.
Whoa. You're saying Liège isn't handsome? Beautiful Liège?
Poor race gets so much guff from Caley.
Well, it's placeholders. But so it's Strade, yeah. So we had 85 kilometers to find something to do with our lives that we didn't expect to have on that Saturday. But it was quite impressive, and it was his first race of the season. And I remember thinking, yeah, okay, thank you for making my job easy. I'm just going to appreciate the marvel of this. And it was a good race for second, and it was a long race for second, a bit longer than this weekend when everyone was just gassed. And that's another thing about Liège, is that the other teams like Israel Premier Tech and to a degree Trek burned themselves out by trying to leave Van der Poel and Pidcock behind, when Van der Poel and Pidcock had the help of, for instance, the Groupama FDJ and Bahrain Victoria's team cars. There were a lot of teams who, I mean, Derek G and Jakob Fuglsang, killing it on the front with the UAE boys, who mostly had a rest and then came back later. But that kind of brings me to my idea, which I didn't really have a great idea for this, but we've all played velo games at some point in our cycling fandom. And, the idea of teams only being able to bring a squad of a certain quality. And that's, maybe that's, the grander discussion is the budget caps, but let's stick to velo games points. The UAE team was one of the strongest teams of the race. Also, there were other teams that had some stellar riders in them. Little Trek, for instance, had a really great lineup. They also had all got hypothermia in the middle of the week, apart from Tom's, I think. But so that didn't help. You look
Tom's is immune to cold.
Well, yes. So anyway, long story short, as short as possible, teams shouldn't be in this hypothetical. Teams have to, if Pogačar's worth 30 points, the rest of the team can only add up to 70 in the Velo Games universe.
So for those that are not clear, so yeah, you basically have a budget, a points budget for any given race, and you can spend that budget. You could either get like 2 big names and a bunch of tiny names, or like 1 big name and a bunch of middle names, or like sort of middle points riders. So it would be basically a way of, if UAE started Pogačar, they'd have to like bring a bunch of like their kind of C team.
You also, I mean, in Velo Games, there are categories as well. So you take 2 sprinters, 3 climbers, and a couple of wild cards with your leader. So you wouldn't be able to have, 6 classic specialists and Pogačar. You'd have to, It's just like I think it's getting a little bit too complicated of a hypothetical. It's just a game, but
can I point out one flaw in that?
It's terribly flawed, Ronan.
There's one flaw in particular that I'm quite that I'm drawing to. By excluding riders of a certain caliber from a race one year, they probably don't amass as many points for the following year, and so the stronger team is back. Indirectly, you're empowering a team to bring their strongest squad the following year.
Yeah,
if it is a salary
I didn't
cap,
say it was perfect.
I will say it was a better suggestion than when Caley initially asked us a question, how do you combat the 50 kilometer solo attacks? And I said you reduce the races to 45 kilometers, which probably, it actually might make for better watching.
I think you'd get a lot of crashes in a 45 kilometer bike race.
Lots
with
of fresh people.
7 good riders per team.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, would you get more DNSs or more DNFs?
Interesting.
Well, we did just see a 2.3K stage at the Tour de Romandie. That's what Kit and I were watching when we started this, and that was actually quite entertaining. So maybe just make every race 2.3K, and then you will not have to worry about these long range attacks.
All right, so we've got bigger teams. We've got Play Fantasy Cycling, which, by the way, I should mention that we're going to kick off our own fantasy cycling games for both the Vuelta Femenina and the Giro d'Italia coming up very soon. So keep an eye out for those. If you're a member or you're signed into the site, you'll get an email about those. But otherwise, yeah, keep an eye out because they're fun games. Ronan, what's your idea?
Well, not my actual idea, but I think Kit hinted at part of the problem here is that when Pogačar does attack, it's very quickly a case of let's fight it out for second. And nowhere was that more obvious, I think, than the fact that several riders in that front group on Sunday raced the Tour of the Alps for 4 or 5 days in advance of the Liège. Okay, there was 24 hours in between it, but that is not enough time to recover from an arduous stage race like that.
And it was particularly arduous. It was most days were just like flesh well on in weather.
Yeah. And going into one of the hardest races of the weekend or of the season in the Liège, Bastogne-Liège. On top of that, if you look what Pogačar did, he wanted to win Liège. He turned up at Liège. He didn't really entertain the other races that week. And I think cycling tradition in that the Ardennes week, and even going further back, Basque Country is preparation for Ardennes week, and then you have to do the entire Ardennes week. Just isn't really compatible with the modern way that cycling works, I think. And so if you want to beat Pogačar, either you decide you can't beat Pogačar and you aim for Amstel, or you think you can beat Pogačar and you don't do you certainly don't do Tour de Alps, and you potentially don't do Flèche and Amstel also. The point I was going to make was just, and I can see the pros of going back to bigger squads, but I think if you look back at Flanders, UAE had like 4 riders in the top 10 there, didn't they? And didn't really make any inroads into Van der Poel's solo attack. I would just go the entire opposite way and limit it to 5 rider teams, which would just introduce so much chaos into the race that probably more often than not, Pogačar would be the strongest, but he wouldn't be in a position to win the race because the race is so far up the road with zero control in the peloton that, I just think that might be more exciting.
All right, so bigger teams, smaller teams play fantasy cycling. I think, Kit, yours is probably the least realistic, if we're being honest.
I think salary caps though is the actual potential answer that Kit's fantasy thing could become. Just wanted to point that out.
So, similar in vibe, right? Yeah, the idea being that you can't build these sort of super teams, but I don't think we're talking about a super team problem here necessarily. We're talking about a super individual problem, and how do you solve for that? And I think part of what made it so obvious this season is we just had, somewhat through luck, like Wout van Aert crashing and hurting himself and not racing, but somewhat through essentially like schedule selection, we just didn't have the guys that can actually competing with each other as regularly as we would have liked to see, right? If you've got every single one of the big 6 or whatever we're going to call them, if you've got them all on the start line of Liège, that race plays out very differently, right? And again, some of that is luck. Some of that is like guys are going to crash. It happens. But some of it is this like just crazy cycling calendar that we've talked about so many times, and the fact that riders can kind of pick their way through it and skip major events to go to altitude or to prepare for something else or whatever else. And I think that like the solution for me is a solution to a lot of things, which is just you got to find a way to force them all to be in the same bike races all the time, which would also make the racing better.
I wonder if there's an issue with, I was going to say specialization, but maybe it's a lack of specialization. Because if you look at Mathieu van der Poel and Tadej Pogačar, 2 of the most successful riders of the season so far, if you look at what they've achieved on their results sheets, Van der Poel has appeared outside the top 10 once out of 7 races, only 7 races. Pogačar has done more race days, but I think fewer actual events because he's done a couple of Grand Tours, a couple of stage races. But they've picked and chosen very carefully what they're going to do. And then if you look at Little Trek, for instance, their leaders, Mads Pedersen has raced everything that he could. And, so he's a specialist. He's a classic specialist who then goes and wins stages at Grand Tours. Van der Poel and Pogačar you probably would consider them specialists in certain ways, but then they go and race the mountain bike at the Olympics or cyclocross season, or they go and try and win the Tour de France, having gone to Flanders and Liège. They have to be much more selective with their choices. And so it's, I don't think you can, you can't expect to have Pogačar turn up at all the spring classics. It's like we've been seeing for the last couple of years with the Tour. He's tried to be less specialized. I'm starting to spin myself in circles with the word specialized and selective and all that sort of thing. But I think, are you getting my point? There are teams that go for the classics like Trek or Soudal Quickstep, but that's a different conversation entirely. And then you've got riders like Pogačar and Evenepoel and Van der Poel who go and they go for single races and they go to win them.
Yeah, I just want to point out this is not a Specialized sponsored podcast.
Specialized with an S.
I think if Evenepoel were there, he would have, to talk about Specialized, I think he would have, managed to at least make it more interesting with Pogačar. Like
yeah,
Caley
and he would not
say.
have sat back. He wouldn't
Like
have
Caley was saying.
let him go. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess to kind of argue against myself here, that the ability of riders to make those decisions around what their calendar is going to look like and to target different races in different years and to say, I'm going to go for this one this year and this one next year and whatever else, that's actually part of the beauty of the sport too. So it's a difficult thing to balance, and I don't think, frankly, I don't think there's no good solution here. The other idea I had is something that we just need a little more Grace Brown in the men's peloton is basically what we need. So for those who missed the racing over the weekend, Grace Brown won Women's Liège. She did so after jumping in a breakaway with 90K to go, 70K to go, a long way out. Basically the day's breakaway, right? She spent most of the day in the breakaway and then kind of waited for the big names to catch them up. But she, at that point, they'd gotten past La Redoute, past Rochefoucauld, and she just has to basically latch on to Nieuwedoma and Vollering as they come by. I wonder if there's some tactical changes in men's racing that need to happen. If you're Little Trek, for example, and you want to win a classic, but you're coming up against these superstars, I think you have to think a little bit outside the box. I think you have to start thinking like, this is a tactic that we see in Grand Tours all the time where they'll send a domestique up the road to make sure that they can get over the first climb that they normally wouldn't get over, right? Because the best way to make sure you don't get dropped on La Redoute is be ahead of Pogačar on La Redoute, right? So maybe there's some sort of tactical shifts that need to happen within men's racing. If you're any team other than UAE and De Kooning, and that's pretty much it, right? Maybe a bit of Visma. If you're any other team, you need to think differently, and you need to try something else. Easier said than done, of course. But
yeah, as soon as you hear people at the start line saying, "Yeah, Pogačar's going to go on La Redoute, I've just got to be ready."
Right.
You're not going to be ready.
No,
you're not going to be ready.
You're ready for the attack. You're ready to get
Maybe talking about next year.
The closest to being ready was what, Richard Carapaz? I think he stuck with the first attack
for about 300, 400 meters. And
then Pogačar looked around and was like, oh, there's still one. And he just went again and just left everybody behind. Like, you're not going to be ready for that. So the only way that you beat him is to be in front of him at that point. And so I feel like we have seen this on occasion in men's racing this year. We've seen these sort of like really hard opening 100K kind of things. We see it in Paris-Roubaix, actually. We've seen a couple winners win this way in Paris-Roubaix. Matt Heyman is a perfect example. Alison Jackson is a perfect example. We've seen this work in other races. And I wonder if, I don't know if that's the tactic, but there's got to be some other tactic. You can't just sit there and play into these guys' hands if you know that they're going to peace out at 50K out and you're never going to see him again.
Anticipating.
Yeah. That's the tactic. Yeah.
I do think though, it's like everything we've just discussed has been exacerbated by, and somebody's already mentioned it, but by the injuries we've had this year. Like in an ordinary year, I'm sorry, Roman, but Bardet does not finish second, especially having ridden through the Alps. And
especially with something in his back pocket, wasting tons of watts.
He has finished on the podium before. I'd like to point that out.
I mean, yeah, but not in 2024 is the kind of, with your Remcos and Vinigo, although Vinigo probably doesn't do Liège,
but Roglic,
arguably part of the problem also, and Roglic, yeah. But the point I was going to make, just to contradict myself from earlier, perhaps it's just that the A races are now B races for the B riders. And I'll just explain that in that if you're not Pogačar level, you're maybe not targeting Liège anymore, you're targeting Flèche, or you're targeting Alps, because those are races that are now achievable versus Liège is like unachievable. And I think back to Mads Pedersen at Tour of Flanders, and obviously he was massively impacted by the crash in Dwars Tour of Flanders 4 days earlier. But my question at the time was like, Pedersen is in such good form. Van Aert has already sacrificed so much of the racing this spring. Why were those two riders in Dwars Tour? Dwars Tour traditionally, whenever I raced it way back in the day, was not a race that the biggest riders turned up to. It was sort of a semi-classic, and this year it sort of took out two of the favourites for Flanders. But the point I was going to make was that Pedersen was lining up saying, or I can't remember if it was before the race or after Flanders, but he at some point had said that, when Van der Poel goes, I'm not going to be able to follow that anyway. So he was trying to get out ahead. And was he lining up at Dwars Door because that was a race he could win, whereas Flanders was like, well, it's
a hedge.
Yeah, it was Toms who told us that. He said that was a team plan. We knew that we couldn't follow when he goes, so we had to try something different.
Mm-hmm.
I think you've kind of touched on what could be another actual earnest answer to the question. I don't know how
we don't like earnest answers.
Yeah, I know this is placeholder. Sorry. I don't know how you achieve this, but I think it is something that the UCI is probably thinking about. And it's something that Richard Pluga has talked about as well. Reducing crashes will help with this problem. Because if you have, again, if you have a Roglic and a Evenepoel at the start line at Liège, then I still think Pogačar wins, but I don't think he wins in the same way. If you have Wout van Aert at Flanders and Roubaix, maybe Van der Poel doesn't go 5 hours before the finish. And you achieve that potentially by finding ways to reduce crashes, reduce injuries from crashes. I don't know how you do that, but I think that is a concern that the UCI has to be thinking about.
And you said the UCI are going to do this, so presumably this isn't actually an earnest answer?
Yeah, right. And of course, well, who else is going to do it, I guess, is the unfortunate, reality.
Put the favourites on fixies.
We could come up with maybe some unearnest answers at some point for all of this. I in a recent episode with Ronan wasn't on, I proposed as a means of slowing the peloton down, forcing everyone to ride really wide bars, banning skin suits. Ronan, I don't think you listened to this episode, or else you would have been furious. Ronan Mc Laughlin has left the meeting. It's just popped up.
Enough.
So I was saying these things, they actually don't make a lot of sense. Like wide bars, for example, would really overly impact small riders, just as one example. But wouldn't it be fun if there was like sort of a handicap system where you could just be like, okay, you've in the last year you've won a race dominantly, so you now have to run 46s on the front of your bike.
Well, I had said this previously. I can't remember what piece it was, but yes, something along the lines of if you won the Tour de France the previous year, you don't get to use carbon wheels at the following year. Or, I mean, even that would be impractical because, you're then impinging on teams' ability to attract sponsors and that. But perhaps instead of having the option to use a team's time trial wheels, the GC winner from the year before only gets their climbing wheels for a time trial stage. Or, if you wanted to get really complicated, restricting how many training camps the teams could go on, which is easily measurable because all these riders have to do whereabouts for anti-doping.
Yep.
And just restrict how much they can go to altitude and stuff. And it still gets messy because you're then impinging on a rider's ability to make the most money they can at the prime of their career.
Yeah.
So it's complicated. But
F1 is kind of like F1 manages wind tunnel time. Yes. For example, that would be the comparison, right?
I think previous winners should start.
That gets so complicated so fast.
It all gets complicated so fast.
I've seen some people wonder why we are even having this conversation. Why can't what's wrong with that? And what's wrong with Pogačar doing this? What's wrong with Van der Poel going from 40K out? It's amazing, and it is, and it's worth our praise. And I think that there are people out there who are wondering how is this a problem, or why is this a problem? And I think we should at least answer that quickly. We probably should have done it at the very beginning, because there are people who I think are frustrated with the negativity. I've seen this in comments on Discord, and I get that, but I think we should answer that really quickly. The reason that we are trying to solve for this problem is that I think we've all been in the business long enough to know when you get this amount of dominance and this lack of jeopardy, people start to turn off the race. They get bored. We can appreciate it. We can. I think Pogačar and Van der Poel are worthy of our praise, and they're amazing riders, and they're clearly a head and shoulders above the rest of the competition and in their various fields. But we are concerned, I think, that if this continues, you get a situation where people just don't have as much interest in watching because there is no jeopardy. And that's, again, I think we should have mentioned this at the very beginning. That's why this is a problem, air quotes.
I think it's a problem right now because we're having to it's just not as exciting to watch. But I think it's kind of like type 2 fun, and 10 years, 15 years, 20 years from now, we'll look back and go, that was an incredible era where Pogačar was just, it's like Merckx. None of us ever complained about how dominant Merckx was. because we didn't have to live through it at the time. We just look back and, it's like, did that really happen?
You're saying almost exactly what actually a commenter that I read has said, which is like people wish they could have seen Merckx race, and that this is a similar situation where it's exactly like you said. People will look back on this and say, "Wow, what an impressive performance!" And that's all true. So again, I don't want people to think that we're being critical of Pogačar or Van der Poel. It's more that we just want to make sure that there's enough entertainment that people keep watching.
I was just going to say, I'm going to give a terrible take in that Max Verstappen almost won every Formula One race last year, or Red Bull almost won every Formula One race. Carlos Sainz from Ferrari won a single race, which stopped him from having a clean sweep of the season. And as much as that was like very difficult to live through and watch such utter dominance, it was amazing. But having had to suffer that many races where the winner was known effectively from lap one, part of me just wanted to see the clean sweep happen and have something to take away from it. And it was kind of the same with Alpes and Liège on Sunday. It was like, right, you've dominated the two monuments so far. I now just want to see you go on and win all three of the spring monuments.
All four, you mean?
San Remo.
Milan, San Remo, Flanders, Roubaix, Liège.
Yes, sorry. Yeah.
So even more impressive.
Their dominance is hindering my math.
Verstappen is what you want to avoid. You want to avoid people getting bored because of the lack of jeopardy.
Yeah, I stopped watching F1.
That's why we're trying to solve for this. So if you're still listening, if you haven't turned us off yet, because that's why we think this is an issue.
And I think it's just fun to talk about, and our job every week is to talk about things. So.
I think it's an important point, Caley, in that you stopped watching it, whereas I'm like I continued watching Formula 1 even though it wasn't that exciting to watch anymore. And I think that's what we're worried about cycling, is that, you know, those who don't really see a problem in it.
I'm a very casual F1 fan. You're a hardcore F1 fan. So, you know, our listeners out there who are hardcore cycling fans, yeah, we're going to watch Liège anyway, right? All of us are going to watch Liège anyway. There's no danger of you or me, or any of us, not watching any of the monuments, because that's what we do. We're bike racing fans, right? But there's a heck of a lot of people out there who are the me of cycling, right? The casual cycling fan for whom, you know, essentially knowing who's going to win going into the morning is not a great thing. Plus, I know this is going to come as a shock to some around in this podcast right now. But we can't do anything about it. The four of us here have zero power. We just like talking about it. That's what we do.
I feel like Ronan has the ability to.
I sensed what he was about to say wasn't going to be a shock.
Ronan could suit up and get into these races. He's done it before, you know. So
no, I have not done Liège.
He could stand between. You've done a Worlds in this area.
I did Liège course, so when I watch it every year, and I turned it on Sunday, Pogačar was already clear, but I like instantly knew what part of the course he was on because I went there for training a lot. But the crucial part is I never raced it, and had I raced it, I probably wouldn't have finished it. So.
I don't think we need to apologize, Dane. We just like talking about stuff. We like thinking through things, and you know, maybe some of it filters out somewhere. Maybe we just get to talk about it. But anyway,
can I suggest we just Caley, what did you think of Wednesday's race? Your least favorite race of the whole season?
Flesh.
Yeah, because we haven't talked about that.
Well, it was only interesting because like most of the field dropped out and it was freezing cold and terrible, but it remains the worst bike race of the year.
Okay. So
here's an
you seemed quite excited at the end of last week. Maybe just because of Liège, the anticipation.
No,
I
liked Amstel. I liked Amstel, and I appreciated Liège. The women's race at Liège was fantastic. Like I said,
my favorite thing about Flesh was how many Scandinavians finished. You know, I think 25% of the field finished, and about 25% of the finishers were Scandinavian. I mean, most of you know X finished, and none of UAE did, for instance.
Tough in the cold. No, we don't need to get back into my thoughts on the Ardennes, because none of us will remember any of this in a year, because the Ardennes are not memorable.
I hope you remember that Amstel was good and that the women's race at Liège was awesome. I hope you remember that.
The women's race of the whole season has been good.
I was joking on Discord that I've decided it's not that I don't like the Ardennes, it's that I don't like the men's Ardennes.
Yeah.
And for me, it's a hangover from not only the Cobble Classics, but it's a hangover from doping era. I cannot get past it. I cannot get past just looking at like the most doped up dudes you've ever seen in your entire life racing up La Redoute. I can't get over it.
Frank Vandenbroek and up St. Nicholas and the big ring.
Exactly. You're like, this is just ridiculous. And it's a me problem. It's not an Ardennes problem.
The 1996 Flesh Wallon winner.
The women's race was fantastic, and it wasn't Liège-Bastogne-Liège. It was Bastogne to Liège.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
And that's probably actually just cut the distances in half, and you have a better race.
Yeah. And clever tactics.
And smaller teams.
That was the big thing. And smaller teams. All right. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. Okay, last Ardennes thing, and then I'm free for another year. Pick your, well, actually, not just the Ardennes, pick your favorite classic, semi-classic, basically any one-day race that's happened between the middle of February and today. Give me the most monumental doesn't have to be a monument race. Dane Cash. Best race of the year so far.
At Skelter Price, I got to drive with Ronan in the passenger seat, and it was really fun. And that was like the biggest, most fun day of the year for me. That was the most monumental day of the year. But the most monumental race that doesn't involve me and Ronan, Women's Liège. I mean, yeah, recency bias, but I thought the Women's Liège was spectacular. Grace Brown made that a perfect capstone to the classics. I mean, I'm thinking back of the various other classics that happened this year. That is the one that had suspense, distance. It's obviously a monument, so it's already monumental. And then we got a winner that was unexpected, and it was great all across the board.
Kit?
I keep coming back to Omloop at Nieuwsblad, so opening weekend. But we had that, well, it was when everyone was still upright, and Van der Poel hadn't started yet. So it was the day when Wout van Aert and all his teammates and Toms and Pidcock and De Lee were in that breakaway. But then they got caught close to the end, and Tratnik and Niels Pollitt went off the front, and there was that great little final chase. I really enjoyed that for a bit of breakaway action, a bit of attacking, a bit of team tactics with the Visma Lisa bike crew. Yes, it was dominance, but it was also, there were some good names in there, and it was an unexpected winner. And the women's race on the same day was good too. Mariana Voss's nth comeback.
I'm very tempted to say Milan-San Remo because that finale was just incredible.
True.
It was the only time this spring I was shouting at the TV. I'm also tempted to say Ghent-Wevelgem because Van der Poel got beat. He was in a 2-up with Pedersen, who won, but the points was very close behind. There was a bit of jeopardy there. But that finale from Ghent-Wevelgem is just too drawn out for it to really be monumental. I would have said Strada simply because it was just so brutal. The men's Strada was so brutal. And although Pogačar won by almost 3 minutes, which sparked part of the conversation we've just had, it was still incredible to see the pros separated by the top 20 separated by 15 minutes or something. But I think the answer I have to give is Little 500.
Beautiful.
What a beautiful segue, Ronan. You knew where I was going with this. My answer, and I'm not even going to need to explain it, is Milan-San Remo because it was fantastic this year. It's fantastic every year, but it was particularly good this year. I also, just off the back of you mentioning that, Ronan, is everyone says Liège is the sort of the hardest, like physically, of the classics. I wonder if Strada is actually harder. It's usually more split up.
It is much shorter.
Yeah, but you end up with the top 20 spread by 15 minutes, right? Oh, anyway.
When Pogačar attacks 85 kilometers out in this race for second, it's good.
Yeah.
If he'd attacked 10 kilometers out,
a topic for another time. A topic for another time. Ronan, you mentioned Little 500. We're going to spend a little bit of time on this. So I had mentioned this race to you previously. I've covered this race. I've been to this race. I wrote a story about it for Velo News back in the day. I've got a bunch of really good friends who went to Indiana University, IU, which is where Little 500 takes place. And it's one of my favorites every single spring. But just for the uninitiated, for anybody who hasn't seen Breaking Away, explain what this race is in brief.
You're going to ask me to explain? I mean, I happened to stumble upon a live feed for it for the first time on Saturday evening, and I watched the final 40 minutes or so, and you're going to ask me to explain what it is.
So you tell me what you saw, and I'll explain what it is.
I saw a mashup between cyclocross and the Madison.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty fantastic.
Madison cyclocross with 4 riders instead of 2 and 2 bikes instead of 4.
So I think that there's a pretty good argument for this race, for Little 500 being, at this point, the biggest bicycle race in North America.
I'm not laughing disrespectfully of Little 500, but it's just, yeah.
I mean, so like the other options would be like Unbound Gravel, which pulls in tons and tons and tons of participants, but not that many fans, or like the Quebec-Montreal World Cups, whatever they're not called World Cups anymore. World Tour races. They used to be World Cups. Grand Prix. There we go. Which bring a lot of fans out, and I think maybe those two would be the actual highest here. But somewhat tongue in cheek, I think you could say that Little 500 it gives them a run for their money. Something like 8,000 fans packing around this cinder track. It's a 400-meter cinder track. Cinder, of course, being like gravel, basically, like really fine gravel, fine and sharp to the point where like, when riders crash, they spend the next 6 months picking bits of it out of their skin. It's pretty nasty stuff. And the event is the men's race, I think, is 200 laps. The women's race is 100 laps. This year, men's race is won by the Black Key Bulls, BKB, which also happens to be the team of my buddy, which is why it was put back on my radar here this year. Women's race won by Theta, and the format is basically, like you say, Ronan, it's a Madison cyclocross race. So you've got 4 rider teams.
A gravel Madison cyclocross race.
Yes, gravel Madison cyclocross race. 4 rider teams with 2 bikes. You can change the seat height when the bike is not being used, but you have to swap the riders. You do these exchanges. It's completely wild because the bikes are also single speed, flat pedals with a coaster brake. So the only way you slow down is you come into the exchange zone and you just wail on the coaster brake like you're 7 years old trying to do skids in your front yard, right? They wail on the coaster brake, and then you have to tag the next person, and then they can take off on their bike, or you can just give them the bike you're on, depending on the size of the riders and how it all works out, right? And the tactics are just fantastic.
But all the bikes are identical as well.
And all the bikes are identical. So they're all made by State Bicycle Company. They're a steel or maybe aluminum frame. I can't remember. Aluminum wheel. I think it's a steel frame. Aluminum wheels. There's a whole bunch of regulations around the bikes themselves. It's like a 35 millimeter Kenda tire, not a race tire. We'll put it that way.
It was the slowest looking race I've watched in a long time.
Yeah, and you're trying to get around this cinder track with no banking. Also, like you say, you're turning on these cinders. You're doing these crazy exchanges. They do this thing called a burn, where they kind of like attack the field just to get a bit of a gap, so that they can do an exchange, and then when the next person starts, they can drop right into the peloton, right? Because you have to. It's unlike a Madison. You can't swing the next person. It's like your team comes to a dead stop and then has to restart.
It's a pit stop where you change driver.
Yeah, it is wild. Anyway,
you mentioned the winners on the women's side was Theta. Like, you're referring to Kappa Alpha Theta. They're like fraternity and sorority teams compete in this event, and
so
Theta's won 9 of them or something. Like, it's awesome if you're a college kid. This is pretty cool. Yeah.
Where's the modern reboot of Breaking Away? I want to see this again. I want to see this. I want to see the sorority version.
So first and foremost, go watch Breaking Away if you haven't done so already.
Because the fraternities are the bad guy in that movie.
Was that?
The fraternities are like the bad guys in that movie.
Yeah. And the Cutters are the good guys. Yeah. And the Cutters still exist in Little 500 today.
Awesome.
Anyway, we don't really have like a discussion point around Little 500 here.
The other thing that you mentioned, burns that they do to like attack just to change rider and have that rider rejoin in the peloton rather than trying to make up a gap. The tactics were like isn't there like bluff burns also where like they pretend they're going to change but actually they're just making an attack and the better chance of getting a gap and then sustaining that. And I mean, some of the teams were obviously taking it very, very seriously. I mean, you have to use flat pedals, but some of them had aero overshoes. I've seen matching aero helmets, matching aero coach aero mitts.
Oh yeah.
There were varying degrees of how serious teams were taking it, but the top teams were taking it very, very seriously. And rightly so.
Top teams being like SAE and BKB and Theta and things like that they take it incredibly seriously. And the riders are quite good. Like, there's been riders that have come out of Little 500 that have gone on to win crit national championships and things like that here in the States. And yeah, it's just it's an incredible event. It's a really cool sort of mashup of, I guess, like cycling culture and the things that you're talking about, Ronan, and just sort of like American university culture. And like, it's an excuse for the town to party for a week. And that's why the kids get so excited about it.
Anyway, the crowds. There were when I tuned in, I forgot to keep tracking, but when I tuned in on YouTube, there was like 3,000 or 4,000 people watching this live. There was at least that or not more in the stadium. And the whole, do I remember correctly, Caley, you were saying that the whole presentation, like the live stream and the MC and the commentating, all that was like media students?
Yeah, so at least I'm pretty sure it's all like media students at IU. Like the photos that I sourced for the stories that we put up were from a freshman at IU who was just shooting the thing for like the Indiana University's like social media pages, right? So it's not student run. The sort of race organizer is a like a paid position. IU Student Foundation runs the whole thing. But yeah, it ties this whole sort of town together. It is an absolutely incredible event. If you live anywhere near it, you need to go some year. Otherwise, honestly, it was significantly more interesting to watch on YouTube than watching Liège over the weekend.
Let's do the member summit there next year.
That would be great.
Just to point out that the stadium, I mean, the fans there, it's like there's way more fans in the Indiana stadium than there are at like the Roubaix Velodrome. Like it's packed. It's again, so just go back.
It's 8,000 people.
Quintessential,
is the official
college-y,
number.
awesome experience, and
Way less barriers also.
Yes.
well,
Yeah.
to the
That's,
media trying to talk to people.
Yeah.
And a really hard event. Like you go out, you pedal as hard as you can on a flat pedal bike for like 3 to 5 minutes, and then you pass it off to the next rider. And like when I went, I was like riders just puking after their session, like just gnarly, really gnarly. Again, we don't really have like a discussion point around this. We were just excited about it. It's a fantastic race.
Do you want to tell people where the name comes from? Just for those
Little 500 comes from
Yeah.
the Indianapolis 500, the obviously big car racing thing that happens nearby. I don't know anything about the Indy 500. That's the extent of my
Well, I
connection there.
think it gets like 300,000 spectators or something. So
Yeah,
this is
it's pretty
the
big.
500 because it's a smaller track. It's got spectators, but less. It's got
It's a little-
bikes instead of cars.
On bicycles, slightly fewer horsepower. Yeah.
Yeah.
We've got some stories up on Little 5 up on the site this week, so make sure you check this out. This great gallery again from a freshman student at IU named Grace. Took some fantastic photos, and we just loved it. I think that Ronan, you have some suggestions that we'll be sending over to our BKB friends in terms of optimization for next year.
Well, I mean, we had talked about doing that in advance of this year, but I mean, the classics put paid to that plan. But yeah, we'll see if we can come up with something for next year. The one that sprung to mind just watching on Saturday night was like, if you went for the biggest, because the only thing you can change like frame size, go for the biggest frame size you can get away with, then you're going to get like a more stretched out pursuit position. I don't know. Watching it, that I'm not knowing that was the only thing.
I just love the idea of trying to optimize a race where you're on flat pedals. there's so much to be gained with just that one thing that you can't change because of the rules. Anyway, let's move on. All right, that's enough about Little 5. Congrats to BKB and Theta. Fantastic rides to all of you. Congrats to everybody who was on the podium. I think Cutters were up there. I'm trying to remember who else. Yeah, just a fantastic race. Super fun to be involved in. But now it's time for some weekly pain. All right.
It's like
I had
watching Ronan's face fall when you say those words.
I have some hard ones for you guys this week.
Oh,
They're difficult. And I made sure that they were difficult because I have a new sound. Historically, when you've been running out of time, I've started to count down. We thought it'd be more fun if I just had something to play for you. And when that little ditty ends, you're out of time. When you hear this.
This extraordinary creature is half blind, half deaf, and this is just about as fast as it can move.
When the cymbal crashes, your time is up. Let's get into today's weekly pain. I'm going to kick off with our usual game of categories here. And I'm going to need you all to give me active men's riders with the most Grand Tour starts. I've looked at the top 20 here. I need top 20 active men's riders with the most Grand Tour starts. So you're probably thinking old guys who've done a lot of Tours de France, etc. Dane, let's kick off with you.
Yeah, Alejandro Valverde just won a race. Is he still active?
No.
Okay.
No,
give it a year. Give it a year. He'll be back.
Let's say Chris Froome.
Don't know why I'm writing that down. You've already said it. I can't use it.
Correct. He is the 12th. He's in 12th with 22 Grand Tour starts. Kit.
Thomas de Ghent.
First place, 25 Grand Tour starts. Actually tied for first with 2 other riders.
Is this we keep going until you can't name anyone? Or
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
So you're up, Ronan.
In that case, I'm going to say Geraint Thomas.
Yep. 13th, 21. Dane.
I will keep it in a similar region and say Mark Cavendish.
24. Kit.
Wout Poels.
24. 4th place. Yep. Ronan.
Rafael Micah.
11th, 22. Those are good. Dane.
You having panic in there for a second?
Yeah, I'm now just naming old guys. Like I'm past the point of knowing the actual answers. Old guys. Michael Moorcow.
Nope. He's up there, but he's in 30th with 17. Dane's out. Kit.
Rui Costa.
Just total number
Unfortunately, no, Kit. 42nd place with 16 starts in Grand Tours. Ronan, you are the champion, and I never even had to play my little song.
The threat of it.
Wait. Ronan has to guess one. Correction.
Damn it. I thought I was going to get away with that. I have two written down here. So I'm going to give you both because I don't. There's one I'm just more like interested in. The one I'm actually going to go with is Iran.
Yep, 6th place, 24 starts,
and the other one is Jan Tratnik.
He's not that old, is he?
I think he's the same age as me, which is getting old at this point.
Nope,
I could be entirely wrong.
Jan Tratnik not in there. He's not in the top 50. Well, congratulations, Ronan. You win that round.
There's a first.
Okay, round two. The Giro d'Italia is coming up. So, what I need from all of you, and I'm springing this on you as usual, and frankly, I would struggle with this one. It's harder than it sounds. I need stage winners from last year's Giro d'Italia. And Ronan, well, actually no, since you won, we'll finish with you. Start with you,
can't
Dane.
do that now.
Start with you, Dane.
Yeah, Primoz Roglic.
He did win a stage, won the ITT. Kit.
Mark Cavendish.
Yeah, he won the last stage, of course. Ronan.
Remco
won stage 1. Back to you, Dane.
He's good.
All right, we've used all the easy ones now.
I'm on my last, we're getting, Jonathan Milan.
Yeah, won stage 2. Well done with his bobbing head sprint. Kit.
I'm trying to think which UAE rider was drenched in rain winning a mountain stage. Joao Almeida?
Correct. Won stage 16. Ronan.
I can't remember his name. The Norwegian guy that was with DSM and is now with Uno X, and I've given it to someone else now, but I can't remember his name.
This extraordinary creature is half blind, half deaf, and this is just about as fast
Ben Healy.
as it can.
Oh, I can't believe I almost forgot Ben Healy.
Amazing.
Ben Healy is correct. Back to you, Dane.
That sound is, that's terrifying.
It really is. Well, now I'm just gonna try to remember who the Uno X guy is, and I can't remember which one it is. I'm gonna take until David Attenborough's
extraordinary
done.
creature is half blind, half deaf, and this is just about as fast as it can move.
He came second. You're both wrong. He was in the pink jersey though. It wasn't a stage.
That's what it is.
So Dane's out. Kit and Ronan.
So what you're saying is there wasn't a Uno X rider who did that.
It wasn't Uno X at the
DSM.
time. He was actually.
He was with DSM, but he still didn't win a stage.
Yeah. Okay.
Kit.
I know
give
Tom's
me one.
also didn't win that stage.
No, he didn't. Parry Pantra.
Nice.
Aurelian Parry Pantra.
Nicely done. Won stage 4. Back to you, Ronan.
This extraordinary creature is half blind, half deaf, and this is just about as fast as it can move.
I'm gonna go for Ghana, but he didn't win a stage last year. Did he?
Didn't win a stage. Zana did. So
that's what I meant. I mean,
Ghana, Filippo.
There was obviously just like a breakup in the.
Kit wins. All right, so we've got a win for Kit, win for Ronan. So we need a tie break. The tie break is you need to give me the average speed of racing thus far in 2024 in the men's world tour in kilometers per hour. And we'll just say closest.
Just for gigs and shuttles, do you want to say meters per second? There's something else that's going to be impossible to guess.
I bet you guys get pretty close.
Yeah.
I bet you get pretty close. Let's go Kit first.
I don't know. I'm going to watch Ronan's face when I say, trying to take into account the stage races as well.
It's quite fast.
But how fast is it? Okay, I'm going to go 37 and either look stupid or stupider.
What is the
37 flat?
Well, yeah, because...
Okay.
Do we say kilometers per hour?
Yeah.
You got to give me a number, Ronan.
So what was the question again?
Average speed of the men's world tour thus far in 2024.
And Kit said 37.
37. And it's just closest. There's no Price is Right or anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In that case, I'm just going to say 38 because I think it's faster than 37. I think it's in the 40s.
Yes, Dane.
I'm not going to contest, but can I say it? Yeah. Oh, I was going to say it's got to be in the 40s, but if Ronan has already pointed it out, then
Especially with the races we've had so far this year.
Ronan wins. 42.6.
Oh, 43 is what I've written down here. So
Which is
yeah, my bad.
26.47 miles per hour is the average speed of the men's world tour.
I just don't really pay attention to
crazy
the speed.
That's
crazy. For some reason I thought I was up against Dane, so I wasn't too worried. Not that Dane isn't going to get the numbers right, but Ronan is going to get the numbers right. So I was.
That's a Ronan question right there.
That's a Ronan question.
I mean, the fact that I had 43 written down.
Yeah,
and
that's
went
fair
for
enough.
38.
Yeah,
it shows how unconfident I was in getting the number right.
Okay,
well, Ronan gets all 3 points this week. Congratulations, Ronan. You're on your way back up. So the standings after this triumphant victory for Ronan. Dane, you're still in the lead with 6 points. Kit, 3 points. Ronan, 3 points. And Abby, 3 points. Johnny and Ian and Cosmo, 0 points.
Got to get Cosmo back on so that he can get points and so that he's somehow ahead of Johnny, who's on most shows.
Yeah, it's true. Although we haven't played Weekly Pair in a while. All right, that's it from us today. We'll be back next week unless you are a member, in which case we're headed over into Escape After Dark. Join us over there. See you next week.